everybody. Welcome to Google SAS office hours. Again, my name is Ethan Gracer. I'm a customer engineer on the Google CBRS team. My role is to help our customers understand how our SAS works, troubleshoot any technical issues, and more broadly provide context and guidance for using CBRS. Today's session will be 30 to 50 minutes, depending on how many questions we get. I'll spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about exclusion zones and the relationship between exclusion zones and suspended grants. You'll notice that there's a chat window to the right of this video. Please feel free to ask questions as I give the presentation. After I've finished talking about exclusion zones, I'll answer questions in the order that they appear. I'll do my best to get to all the questions before the time is up. If I don't get to your question, or if any other questions come to mind after office hours are over, know that you can always reach out to us for support at sas-support@google.com. Okay, before we get into exclusion zones, we're going to briefly review suspended grants. We talked about suspended grants a couple of weeks ago, but I want to make sure that we understand the relationship between suspended grants and exclusion zones, and when we might not get suspended grants in exclusion zones. So firstly, we're going to talk about when we get suspended grants. There are 3 reasons that you'll get a suspended grant. The first reason is after your CBSD immediately requests a grant, the SAS takes a few minutes to calculate potential interference to any higher priority users. And so that interference calculation only happens for new grants. You get a suspension, and the resolution is just to keep heart beating on that grant. The SAS will very likely issue authorization within minutes. If it doesn't issue authorization, then it will return, and it's still suspended. Then you have the other 2 reasons why your grant will be suspended. The second reason is that you can't be authorized today. So the SAS, based on where your antenna is located, the direction it's pointing in, along with the power that you've requested, and so forth, the SAS may not be able to authorize power today. This grant suspension also occurs only with newly requested grants. And what you should do is you should continue heart beating until CPAS completes. The SAS does calculations overnight to make sure that your grant request is acceptable. And if you relinquish your grant or re-register your device after CPAS completes, then you'll lose the grant that the SAS has issued for you. And then you have to wait until the next CPAS. So it's really important not to relinquish your grants or re-register your devices once a grant goes through CPAS. The third reason that your grant will be suspended is specifically because there is active incumbent activity. This is different from the second reason in that the SAS isn't sure whether your device might impact a higher priority user. In the third reason, we know that the grant is currently going to impact a high priority user. This can happen to a grant that has already been authorized. It can also happen to a grant that is new. So this can really happen to any grant. And the resolution for this is to continue heart beating. Do not relinquish the grant or re-register your device. Again, this will resolve based on the incumbent behavior. So when the incumbent finishes using the band, the SAS will open up the spectrum again. So you want to continue heart beating. If you continue heart beating through CPAS, your device, for DPAs, for areas near the coasts, your device may be taken off of our move list for that DPA, in which case, even if an incumbent user comes back into the area, your device will still be able to transmit. So again, the themes here are keep heart beating on your grant. Do not relinquish your grants or re-register your device. Okay, so that's a review of grant suspensions. So what's the relationship between grant suspensions and exclusion zones? So exclusion zones are areas where part of the spectrum is not available for general authorized access for GAA users. In some cases, it may not be available to PAL holders either. So these are areas where some parts of the spectrum are unavailable. We're going to talk about what the different kinds of exclusion zones are and why we have to protect them, and what their relationship is to both grant suspensions and grant rejections. So in this slide, you'll notice that I've chosen 4 locations, and this is basically a heat map. Right, so you're looking at a picture of this is an area near Pittsburgh. You notice Pittsburgh is in the top right corner. So we're kind of straddling a few states here. West Virginia to the south, Maryland to the east. So let's talk about each of these sites one at a time. So you'll notice that on the upper right-hand side, there's a color diagram that illustrates how many channels of CBRS are available in each part of this picture. And you'll notice that in the bottom right corner, the map is actually transparent. There's no color shading. That means that there is 0 channels available in that area. And this area at the very bottom is part of the National Radio Quiet Zone, which you can look up on Wikipedia if you're interested. It's an area where no radios are permitted to be set up unless it's set up by a federal user under certain circumstances. You'll notice that I placed a site in that area. If I tried to set up a CBSD in that location and I sent a request to the SAS with those location parameters, the SAS would respond and say, sorry, we can't register your device here. This is an exclusion zone. So the National Radio Quiet Zone is one kind of exclusion zone. It happens to be one of the few exclusion zones where all 150 megahertz are always and completely unavailable. This is pretty rare. This is not most places in the United States. This is not the vast majority of places in the United States. Okay, so let's take a look at the device near Pittsburgh next. You'll notice that the device near Pittsburgh shows a statement saying all upper 50 megahertz blocked. And so, yeah, the color around Pittsburgh corresponds to the shade number 10 in our graph, or in our key, meaning that 5 channels of CBRS are unavailable. 5 channels refers to 50 megahertz, so that's all upper 50, the entire upper 50 megahertz are blocked. So this area is probably a grandfathered wireless protection zone, or GWPZ. If you request a grant in the upper 50 megahertz in this area, your grant will be rejected, not suspended, rejected. When the SAS rejects a grant, especially when it rejects a grant with a message that says inside exclusion zone, you are in almost all cases, with 1 or 2 very minor exceptions that are not worth going into right now, your device is not going to be able to transmit on the channel that you requested at any power. So if you request a grant and the SAS comes back and says you're inside of an exclusion zone, it doesn't mean that you can't transmit on any channel. It just means that you can't transmit on the channel that the grant specifically requested. In the Pittsburgh area, if you request spectrum in the lower 100 megahertz of CBRS, then you will receive authorization to transmit. You just can't request spectrum in the upper 50 megahertz. Okay, let's move over to the dot that I placed near Cambridge on the left side of the picture. It says some upper 50 blocked. So this area is also a GWPZ, a grandfathered wireless protection zone. There's a difference with this zone, though. You'll notice that the color of the map is the color of the shading is darker. This means that some of the upper 50 are blocked. So if you request spectrum from, say, 3650 to 3670, that spectrum might be blocked by a higher tier user, and you're not permitted to use it. You'll get the same inside exclusion zone message. But if you request spectrum from, in the example I'm giving, if you request spectrum from 3670 to 3700, those channels might not be affected by the GWPZ, and so you would be able to receive a grant for that area. So again, the theme is when the SAS rejects a grant saying inside exclusion zone, you just need to pick a different channel. The last dot in our picture, upper 50 reduced power. So you'll notice that this site is actually placed in an area where all 15 channels are available based on the color map, or the color key on our map. So it's true that all 50 are available. However, you'll notice that this device is very, very close to one of the lighter colored areas nearby. And in that lighter colored area, the SAS has to protect the GWPZ. So this GWPZ also needs to be protected from nearby devices. If you request a grant in the upper 50 in this last location, what will happen is you will receive a grant. The grant will not be rejected. You will not get the inside exclusion zone message. Depending on the power output that you've requested and the direction of your antenna and its height and so forth, what you're likely to see is a grant suspension. And so this is taking us back to our previous slide where we talked about the message that the SAS cannot authorize your grant yet. I'm going to go back to that slide for a minute. The second reason, can't authorize today, right? The SAS is unable to authorize your grant today. And the reason that you'll get this suspended grant is that the SAS needs to do some math overnight to determine whether or not the power that you've requested is likely to cause interference to the GWPZ. If the SAS overnight during CBRS determines that your grant will not impact the GWPZ, then it will allow you to start transmitting. If the SAS does think that your grant is going to impact the GWPZ, then what it will do is it will calculate how much power you can use, and it will terminate the grant that you initially requested, but it will say, if you request a grant on this channel with this power, I'll authorize it for you. Your device manufacturer should have already configured your device to handle this automatically. So as a customer, there shouldn't be anything that you have to do in order to take advantage of this new grant. But the key thing, and this is going back to the previous slide, is that you have to hold on to the grant. You have to hold on to the grant through CPAS. And after CPAS completes, when your device gets the new grant, you have to keep using that grant. If you relinquish that grant and request a new one, you have to go through the whole process of waiting for CPAS again, because the SAS needs to make sure that any new grant won't impact the nearby GWPZ. So again, as a recap, the four situations are: one, you're in a exclusion zone for all 150 megahertz. These are very rare. And in these zones, you will not be able to register a device. The second case is that you're in a GWPZ that blocks all of the upper 50 megahertz. The third case is that you'll be in a GWPZ where only some of the upper 50 megahertz are blocked. And in both of those situations, you just have to pick a different channel. And finally, you might be in an area that isn't protected by a GWPZ, but is close enough to one that the SAS has to calculate whether or not your grant is likely to cause any interference. Your grant will be suspended from the time that you request the grant until the first CPass overnight. After the first CPass, the SAS will either terminate your grant, or in many more situations, it will suggest what grant will be acceptable, so that you can start so that the SAS can authorize transmission and you can start sending out signals. Okay, that's all I have for today. Remember that there is a chat window on the right side of your screen. I see that Stephen said hello. Hi, Stephen. So if anybody has questions, I am open to hearing them. I hope that I can get some of your questions answered today. So type away. Okay, so I see we're getting a question from Stephen about future plans for the use of the spectrum. One where it sounds like you have an application where you're going to want to move CBSDs around. So I am not sure off the top of my head whether this is something that is being discussed at a policy level. I suspect, based on the way that the specs are written right now, that if it is going to happen, it's probably not going to happen in the very near future, right? We need to know a very specific location for every device in order to identify how we can best protect incumbents. And so if devices are moving around, it's very tricky for us to say, it's very tricky for us to know whether, as your device moves, it might start interfering with an incumbent user. So I would say if this is something that you're interested in, I would check in with the WIN Forum or with CBRS Alliance. But generally speaking, I don't expect that base stations, CBSDs, will be able to move anytime in the near future. I see that Adrian is asking what I mean by power. So by power, I'm referring to the EIRP, or effective isotropic radiated power of the device. So the SAS might change the power in the grant request if you're near an exclusion zone. And it will do that in order to make sure that your radio emissions don't reach the incumbent user in the protection zone. One thing to keep in mind with devices that move is that we have seen cases where customers register devices and operate them for a short period of time, deregister them, and then move them to a new location. So, there could be temporary events, or there could be um, higher load in a given area for some reason at a certain time. And so somebody will set up a device just temporarily and then move it. So you don't have to set up your CBSDs and then leave them there forever. But in terms of a constantly moving CBSD, that's what I was referring to earlier when I mentioned that it would be very tricky for us to identify the effect on incumbents if that device isn't going to stay in place while it's turned on. Yeah, so I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a minimum period, Stephen, but the key thing is that while the device is powered on, it cannot move. Right, so if the device is registered with the SAS and it's turned on and it receives a grant, it cannot move. To move something hours. If you want to move something every few hours and didn't need to know anything about it while it was moving. So again, you could move the device every few hours, but each time that you moved it, you would have to turn it off. I guess that's the key distinction here. If the device is powered on and transmitting, it can't be moving. I don't see a reason why you couldn't turn it on and transmit for 10 minutes. I'm getting some feedback from my team. Apparently a powered on device can move 50 feet laterally without needing to deregister and re-register, but anything more than 50 feet will have to. Yes, so typically grants are issued very quickly by Google SAS. So we do try to get you a grant in a few seconds if possible, and I would say in most places that is typical. But if you're near, again, so in the situation we talked about, if you happen to be near an exclusion zone, your device might not be able to operate in parts of the spectrum immediately. You might have to request a different channel. I do believe that it's 50 meters, but the team is double checking on that. Yeah, so we've confirmed it is 50 meters. Yeah, I used the wrong unit. Sorry about that. All right, a question from Matthew. Does Google have tech support if one has issues connecting to the SAS? Yes, we do. So we have a 24/7 email support line, which is available at sas-support@google.com. We are planning to offer phone support in the near future, which will be available for kind of more urgent issues where a device is registered and the device has authorization to transmit and is no longer able to. So that will be available soon. We do also offer a help center. So if you go to support.google.com/SAS, we have a lot of help content on there designed to help operators get started. So if you need to learn more about how CBRS works, or if the SAS is sending you an error code that you don't understand, or if you're deploying near the coasts and you're confused why getting spectrum is a bit trickier, those are all things that you can find on our help center. And I definitely recommend that everybody give that a good read. There's a lot of great content in there. Question from Leo. I have an RSA certification from the Win forum, but how do I use it with the SAS? So there are a couple of different kinds of certificates that you can receive. There are 3 kinds, or 4 kinds. One is a CPI certificate, right? So this is if you do your CPI training. This is probably the certificate that you're referring to. And a CPI certificate allows you to register a device with the SAS. Each device vendor has a different method for using your CPI certificate. Some device vendors allow you to use the SAS portal to register your device, and the SAS portal lets you use your CPI certificate. And again, we have more information about how to use your CPI certificate in the SAS portal in our help center, so definitely go check that out. But not all device vendors support using the SAS portal with your CPI certificate. Some device vendors require you to give them your CPI certificate directly or to use it with the device. So it's important that you check with your device vendor to understand how to use your CPI certificate. There are 3 other kinds of certificates that you may need to think about. One is a CBSD or certificate. The other is a domain proxy certificate. And the last one are the Win forum root certificates. All of those certificates are typically handled by the device vendor. They aren't something that you as an operator have to handle. So if you have any issues getting your device to connect, you may need to talk to your device vendor about getting the right CBSD, domain proxy, or Win forum root certificates installed on the device. Leo, let me know if that doesn't answer your question. I'm pretty sure that you're referring to your CPI certification. Okay, so the domain proxy, yes. So to use your domain proxy certificate, we have interoperability testing instructions on our help center, which they include information on how to send a curl request to the SAS, right? Just a standard HTTP request. And one of the requirements of every HTTP request that you send to the SAS as a domain proxy is that you include the domain proxy certificate in the certificate chain over SSL. So yeah, for more information on that, check our help center, look for the article on sending a request to the SAS via a curl script. And if you have any we could, that's something that the particulars, if you're having any challenges, definitely shoot us an email at sas-support@google.com, and we can help you identify how to connect. So Stephen asking, you want to use a different technology in the spectrum. Does that have to go through WinForum, or is it just controlled by the FCC? So the SAS is technology agnostic in the sense that all we regulate is radio emissions. So the SAS doesn't have any opinions about whether you use it for LTE or use it for fixed wireless or you use it for anything. We don't care. The SAS has no specific requirements around radio protocols. So the key requirement is that if you're going to use a different technology in CBRS, you just have to make sure that you're only transmitting on the channels for which you're granted, and that you're using an FCC certified CBSD. So you may, depending on what technology you want to use, there may or may not be a CBSD that supports it. So I'd say that's probably that would be your primary blocker. Hi, Mitchell. Great question about the SAS portal. So you cannot currently view where incumbents are in the SAS portal or exclusion zones. We do have plans to release a clearer map of that information into our network planning tool in the near future. So there isn't a way to kind of open up the SAS portal and see the zones the way that I demonstrated in the slide as of yet. Again, we are planning to release that functionality very soon, and we will send out an email to all of our customers once it's available. What you can do in the interim is we do have a test SAS. You can register a device in the test SAS. If you're not sure how to use the test SAS, you can reference our onboarding email, which we sent you. And if you can set up a device in the test SAS and receive a grant, then if you set up that device in the same place in our production SAS, you will see about 90% the same behavior as long as there aren't a lot of other CBSDs around. Hi, Mitchell. This is a great question and one that a lot of people have. I think it's an important thing to understand about CBRS. So what are the rules for allocating spectrum in GAA? So if the SAS does not, the SAS's primary responsibility is to protect incumbent users or higher priority users from interference. Right? We don't have PALs yet. But those PAL licenses are going to come into effect sometime in the future, and that bandwidth has to be protected and incumbent usage has to be protected. So that's the SAS's primary purpose. GAA is different. Anybody who requests a grant in the GAA portion or anyone who requests a GAA grant is permitted to request it. So there's no first mover advantage. What happens is the SAS determines whether or not the aggregate interference from all of the GAA users in an area will cause interference to Tier 1 or Tier 2 users. So if there are a lot of people requesting GAA grants and there are no high priority users around, then the GAA users can start to interfere with each other. And so there is an element of providers needing to cooperate and discuss kind of what pieces of the spectrum that they want to use so that people aren't interfering with each other in the GAA band. Now, over time, what we, the WIN Forum and Google in particular we're looking to define rules around coexistence in the GAA spectrum. So right now, in the example you gave, if you request all 80 megahertz, or if you request an 80 megahertz grant and then another user comes in and requests the same 80 megahertz, we're not going to tell you each to take 40. Longer term, the SAS may start making recommendations, and it's still going to be up to the providers to determine whether to follow those recommendations or not. Google because we have access to Google Maps and all of that very high quality clutter data from our mapping software, we can create a really clear picture of what interference a tower is likely to cause based on where it's placed. And so we're planning to use that information in order to help GAA users coexist without interfering on one another. This is definitely in our roadmap. It's like very much at the forefront of our minds. And as we start to release more coexistence features, we'll communicate those out to you as well. What that's likely going to look like at first is that right now our spectrum inquiry response just sends back all of the GAA channels, and it lists them in order from 3550 all the way to 3700, but some of those channels might be in use. What we want to do first is we want to sort those channels based on which one is most likely to get you a grant that's going to be useful. And then over time, we'll start augmenting that with additional features to account for high clutter and just better general management of the GAA band. All right, I think we've got time for one more question if anyone has it, and then we're going to call it a day. All right, everybody, I think that's taking us to time. Thank you for tuning in and asking lots of great questions today. I hope that you have more information on how exclusion zones work, and we've touched on a few other important pieces around how GAA works, how you can move devices and what the restrictions are on that. We've talked about domain proxy certificates and how to use them with the Sass. So if you have any questions about any of these topics or any other topics, again, feel free to email us at sas-support@google.com. And definitely check out our help center as well at support.google.com/SAS. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.